right. So the main function of a lens is to project a sharp, undistorted image onto a film or image sensor. Now, depending on what lens you're using, distortion will occur. How's that?
Good.
Yeah, man.
Okay. So yeah, distortion will occur. So lens is a piece or several pieces of optical glass shaped to focus on an image of a subject, essentially, it's collecting light rays coming from a scene in front of the camera and project them as images onto light-sensitive material. In our case, right now, the light-sensitive material is the sensor of our digital cameras and or phones, okay? Which is just a digital sensor as well. Okay, so there's a few different parts to a lens. So you have your distance scale. Those of you who are using, who are not using a phone, you have a distance scale, most likely. It'll tell you the distance in which the focus will happen. Depth of field scale, and then you'll have an apertures ring with your f-stops on it. Now, you know, I say that, but my you know, I have the latest Nikon lens on my mirrorless, and it doesn't have any of this information. It just has a focus ring. So, you know, I'm not sure. You can always just take a look at your lens and find out. Now, on the rim of the lens, you see right here, there's a lot of information. You know, sort of the serial number of the lens. This ratio 1 to 3.5, that's your focal length. I mean, that's your aperture, your widest open aperture on your lens. So this lens must be a zoom lens for 43 to 86 millimeter zoom lens, and the widest open it shoots is 3.5. Okay. Also, a lot of times, it doesn't look like it on this lens, but a lot of times you can even find the diameter of the lens as information right here, and that will help you if you're trying to buy some kind of filter to put over your lens, or UV filter, or polarizer, or anything like that. That a lot of times that information will be on the rim of the lens as well. This is looking down on it, in case that's not clear. So the main function of a lens is to gather light rays and focus them sharply onto film. So, you know, whatever light is bouncing off of the subject, right? If you were taking a photo of me, it would be the light bouncing off of me, shooting back towards you, the person with the camera, through the lens. I guess technically there's a lens in my computer, right? And it's gathering the light rays and hitting the sensor, whatever it is, on the computer, and then projecting it to you all. So lens is gonna, you know, focus is sort of the most important part of the function of the lens. So, you know, our eyes, as you all have sort of experienced at this point, is you know, our eye goes to where you've focused, right? So in the case of the two baseball players at the bottom, you know, you can look at each image, the same composition, but just different focus, and it tells you a different story. You know, the first image is about the pitcher, right? Because that's what's in focus. The second image is about the batter, because that's what's in focus. So just, you know, just by moving the focus ring around, you can really just control or change what it is that you're trying to say about this scene in front of you.
I have a question about focus.
Yeah.
For you, like personally, like when you actually do your shoots, because I know like there's the autofocus. Well, there's like autofocus, like single autofocus, like continuous, and then of course like manual focus. In terms of like, if we're gonna actually learn focus, do you think it's better to use manual focus or one of the autofocuses, just to kind of?
I would say, you know, challenge yourself. There's, you know,
or what do you personally like?
Well, yeah. So let me say this. it's funny, but I'm really not great at focusing. To be honest, yeah. Manual focus, I got my glasses on. It's
Right.
just, it's tough for me to manual focus, and get it. And I say that more like I've done a lot, my work a lot times deals with large format cameras. So like focusing is not just like turning a knob, but it's like literally taking an entire piece of the camera, moving it forward and backward. And sometimes the focus, we'll get into focus plane in a second, but it's very tough to nail your focus. So what I've done in the past, especially on things that really are important, is I work with other people. I'll work with another photographer, or have an assistant or something like that. And in the past, I've made sure my assistant looks through the camera and makes sure that I'm in focus. Especially on jobs, that's really where it's important, right? You're shooting a portrait of somebody important. You want to make sure your focus is right. Now, there's other ways of doing that. There's, depending on the job, you could shoot what we call tethered, which is the camera is plugged straight into your computer, and the image, instead of looking at the image on the back of the screen of your camera, you're looking at your image through Lightroom, right? And through Lightroom, you can zoom in and just make sure that you're focused.
Okay.
Right. So that's sort of like the professional way of answering that question. Now, for this assignment, I'm not going to require that you shoot it out on manual, but I would suggest you shoot it on manual.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to get a feel for it, and just to really understand it. And if a bunch of them come out soft, then oh man, I really need to practice with this a little bit.
Okay.
But that's not to say like, I spent as you probably all have spent some money on your cameras. Autofocus is one of the key components of that camera that you paid for. So I would never say don't utilize it. I would say utilize it more than not utilizing it, because it doesn't make sense to not utilize something that you paid for. Okay. Right? Yeah. Oh man, we have a new participant. 1 second.
And may I ask a question along those lines?
Sure. Hit me with it.
So I'm assuming that, like, let's say I'm taking pictures at a soccer game and I want to do stop action, and things are moving and the subject is moving close and far. It would be very difficult to use manual focus to get what you want, correct? So that's where actually autofocus might come in handy as well, because otherwise you're sitting there trying to manual focus and then you miss the shot.
Yeah, I mean, but to say like people have done it, there was a whole era of photography before manual focus, right? So it's not impossible. What happens is, the more you use your camera, and you talked about it earlier, carrying your camera around with you. Well, to me, carrying your camera around with you is not so much to make sure that you capture every single moment. To carry your camera around with you is like, to me, is like exercising muscles, right? It's exercise. It's becoming really acquainted really well with your camera, acquainted with how the autofocus works, how the camera feels, how and becoming really intuitive with the camera. The more you carry it around, the more you sort of and composition becomes like a muscle, and you start realizing that your compositions get much better the more you practice. It's practice, practice, practice. So shooting a soccer game, it's practice. Knowing where that ball's going to go and how you want to photograph that thing, that's practice. That's that's understanding your camera and understanding how to compose. That there's just no other way around it. Even with autofocus, you're going to find that you shoot hundreds of trash photos to get one or two good ones at a soccer game.
Okay.
Even with autofocus. Okay. So that's all I'm saying. If you can, carry your camera around with you and really think of it every day. Shooting with it every day is as you're building up a muscle.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah, cool. All right, move on. All right, so the focal plane we kind of mentioned earlier. Now, you'll see it says focal point and focal length. So think of your you know, we'll call it the plane of focus. Okay, does everybody understand that word plane? Not like an airplane, but like a big flat plane.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So when you're focusing, there's a plane that is moving back and forth. Think of it this way. And this is what's going in and out of focus. Does that make sense? So this point right here, this focal point is moving backwards and forwards as you move your focus ring. Okay. So this is where your lens is focusing at the moment. Okay, so this is the subject right here, and the light bouncing off the subject. I wish there was something here, but like pretend this is a person right here. The light is coming from all around, bouncing off of this person, and the light rays are coming back this way, and your focal point, right? And here's your focal length, is between where the light rays start to come in together to a point, and your lens is focusing on that point and then projecting that image backwards and upside down back into your camera. Okay, so this focal plane, the focal plane is made up of many focal points. But that focal plane is important to think about when you have this focal length, like this is what's in focus, right? The focal length changes size with different apertures, and we're going to talk about that in a second, what that means. Okay, but always think of focus as this plane that moves back and forth. All right, so focal length determines magnification of the image. Longer lens equals greater size of subject in image. Angle of view also determines focal length. So longer lens equals less angle of view, when there's less of the scene shown, and we'll see some examples of that in a second. So if you hear me talk about a normal lens or normal focal length, on a 35 millimeter, which is what we are using, it's a 50 millimeter lens. Okay, now that will give you an image closest to the view of a human eye. So basically what we see out of our eyes is about a 50 millimeter focal length. Does that make sense? So when you have a 50 millimeter lens, that's what that means. Okay.
So even if mine says like 55, that's still
basically
about close.
Yeah, somewhere between like 45 and 55. Yeah, it's about the same.
Jamming.
Okay. And you'll see that bridge right there at 50 millimeters. So we'll see in a second, Golden Gate Bridge with a wider lens. So short focal length, wide equals a wide angle lens. So when the number gets smaller, so a 28 millimeter to 35 millimeter is shorter than normal. So we would call it a wide angle lens. It gets even wider than 28. You can go to 24, 20, so on. So it's an increased angle of view, right? We see more of that bridge than we did here, right? It's shot from the exact same location, same spot, but you get a lot more. Decreased magnification, which makes sense, right? Increased depth of field, we'll talk about that in a second. And then it's great for when you can't move back, but it is going to give you some distortion and exaggerates the distance. Okay. And we'll look at some extreme cases of distortion in a second. So can somebody tell me why you would use a wider angle lens instead of a 50 millimeter, a normal lens?
Get a wider view landscape photography.
Sure, yeah. Landscape photography for sure.
And isn't the image that's created with a wide angle lens, doesn't it end up being bigger? Like just the whole, like if you were able to print it out, it would be bigger, I think. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Bigger? No. I mean, your sensor is still the same size. It's still the same amount of information being recorded. It's just a different view of that information.
Okay.
You know, a wide angle, also like in like sort of cinematic terms, a wide angle, a wide shot, right? That is an establishing shot. That is a shot that gives you the environment. That is a shot that places you where you are, right? Or places where the camera is, at least places the scene. So, you know, I like to always think of these things sort of in like, you know, cinematic terms, like movies. Like, okay, like here, if we were watching a movie about the Golden Gate Bridge, here's the establishing shot, right? Here's the bridge. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then, you know, here is about maybe somebody walking on the bridge. Any of you seen that sad, dark documentary called The Bridge, about the Golden Gate Bridge?
Me and my wife can only get through about 30 minutes. It's pretty disturbing.
It's so heavy, man. Jeez.
That dude could have called someone and been like, yo, that person's going to jump.
Yeah. Yeah. Over and over again.
Yeah, it was cool. It was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. I saw it in the theater in like Berkeley. It was not good. Yeah. All right. So that's 24 millimeter lens. So then we got the telephoto lens, the long lens. Okay. So longer than normal focal length. You'll hear me call it a long lens. 70 millimeter to 500 millimeters, right? Narrow angle of view, increased magnification, decreased depth of field. You talk about that. And when you can't get close, you bust out your, 70 to 500 millimeter lens, whatever you got, and you'll get less distortion. Okay, far less, if probably none at all. Okay. Now, why would somebody use a telephoto lens?
Something's far away.
Okay, yeah, perfect. I mean, that's sort of like a really basic definition, but like
social distancing.
Social distancing, there you go. But also think of like somewhere between like 70 and 100, maybe 200 millimeter. Those are really, really great portrait lenses. So like, and maybe there's some examples in here, but those are great portrait lenses. So, you got your normal, which is fine. You got, which is great, which is what we see is sort of like a standard, like middle point. You got your portrait lenses and you got your wide lenses for, landscape shots. And that doesn't mean you can't shoot a landscape with a telephoto lens. It's just going to be a different kind of landscape, right? Or that doesn't mean you can't shoot a portrait with a wide angle lens. It's just going to be a different kind of portrait. Okay. So there's no rules to any of this necessarily, but the understanding the sort of limitations and what does occur with certain lenses is really important to understand, to really have a good grasp of what you're shooting. Okay. So some of you have, a single lens reflex, an SLR, DSLR for digital, and you'll have a single lens. And some of you, nobody has a point and shoot, but essentially let's just think of our phones as point and shoots. Okay. Glorified sort of point and shoot cameras. Now, newer phones, man, their cameras are in some way superior to some of the point and shoots that are out there. A lot of point and shoots. So, I wouldn't. Cell phones are really, really killing it these days. Let's keep moving. Oops. Okay, so this is just a sort of, for Anthony, an X-ray of the lens optics. So essentially, there's these grayed out pieces. Those are your pieces of glass. The more glass inside your lens, the more expensive it is. The sharper it is, the heavier it is. Okay. So let's go over here to fixed or prime lenses. Now, A prime, can somebody tell me the difference between a fixed prime lens and a zoom lens?
A zoom lens zooms, and a prime lens is only one focal length.
Perfect. So a zoom lens has multiple focal lengths. So it covers the span. Like a really popular one is a 24 to 70. So you have a 20. It shoots at 24 millimeters, so really nice and wide, to 70 millimeters, which is, remember, is at the very bottom end of telephoto lenses, right? So a prime lens is, like in this instance, this is a 24 millimeter lens. It does not zoom. It's going to stay at 24 millimeters. Okay. So the pros of using a prime lens, it is very sharp. Okay. The clarity is good. It's usually a little bit smaller than a zoom lens, and it's going to shoot wider than a 24 to 70. Okay. The cons, you'll need multiple prime lenses for multiple focal lengths. Okay, so that's tough. On location, that's tough, right? If you're shooting an event and you only have one focal length, well, you only have sort of one angle of view. You got to move around a lot. Whereas if you could shoot wide and then also punch in with a 70 millimeter, like that, you're doing well. It's, it's less versatile. It's less versatile, but it is sharper. The clarity is good. And you can definitely shoot in lower light with a prime lens than you can with a zoom lens. Okay. So zoom lens. So you have multiple focal lengths. We talked about that, right? And some of you probably have a zoom lens. Who has zoom lenses here?
I do.
I do.
Yeah.
And
You do?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Tomasa, you have your phone, right?
Yeah, I have my phone.
Okay, so your phone is a zoom lens, right? You can zoom in and out on your
Yeah.
phone.
And
Okay.
sometimes it does it like automatically, so it's like,
It
okay.
does it automatically. Wow.
Yeah, because sometimes I'm trying to take a photo and sometimes it just automatically blurs the background, or sometimes the foreground is like blurred, but the background is like really clear. So
Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. So, so yeah, the zoom lens, it's a versatile lens. You can, and don't get me wrong, it's this, some of them just come with a camera, and some of them, are not necessarily the greatest, and some of them you can pay almost the same, if not more, for a zoom lens than you do a prime lens. But that means that there's more glass in it and it's really sharp, right? I've spent $2,000 on a zoom lens before. They're expensive. They can be expensive, okay? But just the same, the more expensive they are, the more glass that's in it, right here where it says 2.8 is the lowest aperture at best. That means that 2.8 zoom lens is a very expensive lens, because it's also letting you shoot in low light, right? So that's sort of the reason why lenses have different costs. Okay. Now zoom lenses, like we said, way more versatile, right? Way more versatile. So you don't, if you're sort of a documentary person, or you like to, be out and about, you don't like to carry a bunch of gear, you're a much looser shooter, then yeah, zoom lens is where it's at. If you're shooting product in a studio where everything is controlled, well, you'll probably want to use a prime lens, right? So it just really matters what it is that you're sort of doing. And right now a zoom lens is fine because all of you have a zoom lens. It's fine. It's great. You're shooting your kids, you're doing your thing. Like, that's great. If you start to move into, different facets of photography or commercial photography, well, all of a sudden having the sharpest, best image possible becomes more important than being versatile. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So Here, the top is a red line 24 millimeter lens. And then underneath it is not a red line 24. They're both Canon lenses. They both fit on Canon bodies. So you'll notice the 1.4 right here, f 1.4. That means this 24 millimeter can shoot at 1.4, which means low light, right? If needed. Whereas this one is a 2.8. So that's 2 stops difference, right? 1.4 to 2.8. We're talking probably a difference of $1,200, right? And they're both 24 millimeter lenses. So what's happening is this lens is bigger, meaning it's got more glass in it. It's going to be sharper. It's going to give you a crispy image that is really beautiful, right? Not to say that this image is not sharp or not going to give you a nice crispy image as well, but the quality is definitely going to be a little less, or quite a bit less, $1,200 worth less than what what you'll get out of this. Okay, so that's why lenses cost. They could be the same focal length but cost different amounts of money. Okay. Here's another example. You got your 18 to 200 down here at the bottom. Does anybody have this lens? Is this the lens anybody's using?
I have a, what is it? A 70 to 300.
Okay, cool. You got a 70 to 300, and this zoom lens is a 24 to 70. This is not the one that I spent $2,000 on, but the predecessor to this lens is a version 2. This is just a version 1. But that lens costs $2,000, and it's a 24 to 70, and it shoots at 2.8. Right? This is a 18 to 200, which is actually covering a lot more focal lengths, right? 18, which is stupid wide, to 200 millimeters, which is really punched in, right? That's a lot, but because it's a lot, it doesn't have a lot of glass in it. It's just sort of, usually it might be the lens that comes with the camera or something like that. Different lenses just cost different amounts of money depending on what it is that you're looking for. I used the 24 to 70. I used it commercially. I had to have a really versatile lens for a lot of the work that I was doing. So I had to get a 24 to 70. Now, since I'm doing, all I'm really doing is my fine artwork, I have prime lenses. I don't even think I have a zoom lens. I don't have a zoom lens. I have on my Nikon, I have a 28 millimeter prime lens. I have a 50 millimeter prime lens, and I have a 100 millimeter prime lens on my Nikon. Okay. I have film cameras on my 35 millimeter film camera. I do have a 70 to 200. So I have a 24 millimeter wide lens for my Canon AE1. I have a 50 millimeter, and then I have a 70 to 200. Okay. Yeah. So keep moving. So fast lenses are referring to the widest aperture possible on the lens. You'll hear this the more you sort of work your way through photography. How fast is the lens, or it's a really fast lens, or anything like that. It's talking about that f-stop, right? That 1.4, 2.8, whatever, blah blah blah, 3.5, all that. That's what they're talking about. Now, a lens that's really fast is like that has that opens up quite a bit, like a 1.4 or 2.8, depending on what lens you're talking about. Okay. It takes less light to expose the film. Now, just because somebody can shoot at 1.4, I would not necessarily say shoot at 1.4, right? Shooting at 1.4, and we'll talk about it in a second, is going to have a certain look and a certain, there's a certain reason why you would use it. Okay. But that's what we're talking about when we refer to fast lenses. So the effects of a lens, of course, is focus, but it also affects the contrast, the speed, which we just talked about, fast, sharpness, which is important, right? Color, clarity, vignetting, the angle of view, which we know about a little bit, depth of field, which we're going to have an assignment on, and also distortion. Okay, those are all the different effects of the lens. All right, so color and clarity, I'm just going to hit on it real quick. You know, I have some old lenses, you know, for whatever reason, everybody wants to give me their old camera gear, and a lot of times it's just trash. And you can take a look at the lenses and you can see that they're foggy. The clarity is not so good anymore. The lens glass is coated. And those older lenses, if they weren't taken care of, the coating starts to cloud up. Okay, so you got your clarity, you got your color, the way it reads the color, right, and shoots it back onto the sensor. Vignetting is where the edges of your image get darker. I'm pointing at the screen as if you guys know what I'm talking about. The edges either get darker or lighter. That's called vignetting. Okay. And we're going to talk about next week about how to sort of correct for that in Lightroom, for those of you who don't know how already. Contrast, remember the differences between highlight and shadow, right? High contrast means a higher, bigger difference. Low contrast means a smaller difference, grayer. Sharpness, you know, sort of how tack sharp things are. It's funny, this is such a bad resolution file, but how tack sharp things are. Okay, different lenses, more expensive lenses are going to be sharper. Okay, distortion. This photo looks like you're looking at it through a fishbowl, right? You see this cat right here? How funny. I never noticed a cat before. So there is a very distorted image, right? And that's because they shot with probably either a 20 millimeter, 18 millimeter, or fisheye. Probably a fisheye. This looks like a fisheye. Okay, and we're going to talk about specialty lenses. So depth of field is what our assignment's going to be on. Remember this image, that the image on the left is a very busy image, and the image on the right is very clear, concise message of what this photo is about. The image on the left, not so much. We don't know. Okay. So again, I don't know why we're going over this again, but you know, 50 millimeter closest view to the human eye, sort of as we see things, right? The short wide angle, 17 millimeter to 35, this one's saying. There's little magnification, subject looks small. It does exaggerate the distance from the foreground to the background, right? You can even see it right here. Do you think this cow's head is as far away from this guy is in real life as it's seeming in this photo? Probably not, right? Oh. Large angle of view, sort of think of it as the establishing wide shots or landscapes. And then you got greater depth of field, which we're going to get into. 70 plus millimeter for a telephoto lens, 70 to 500, we said. Narrow angle of view, right? It's really punched in, I like to say, like it's punched in. Greater magnification, as you can see with this bird. Less, if no distortion. And then the depth of field is also less. All right, so here's some examples again. We got your 35 millimeter up at the top, not the format of the camera, but the focal point of the lens is a 35. It's wide, right? It's wider than that 50, right?
Yes.
And then you can really start to see right here what's going on. So you got your 35, your 50, your 100. I'm assuming this is 200, probably 400, 500 right inside there from where we're standing, right? Here's another good example. Your 28 is on the left, your 50 is in the middle, and your 100 millimeter is on the right. Now you can see the objects haven't moved, but the camera has moved on the images underneath. So your angle of view really matters too. So like if you're shooting at 28 millimeter, it still relatively stays the same even if the camera moves, but then your 50 millimeter, you start to see the different placement of the different objects, right? they're no longer on the same sort of plane, and then same with the 100 millimeter, just from moving the camera in. Okay. Don't worry too much about that kind of stuff, because we don't have the luxury of all using the same standardized lenses. But another good example, the wide angle, like, have you all seen photos right here, with your steep perspective and your flat perspective? Have you seen, like, when this happens where one part of a person's body is, you know, the hands look humongous compared to the head, right? Well, chances are that that person was photographed with a wide angle. Okay, you got some distortion happening. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So here's a long lens versus a short lens, right? Long lens, let's say this is 70 millimeter, right? And then I'm sorry, long lens, moderate distance, and short lens up close. Okay. So I would, like I said earlier, use 100 millimeter, 200 millimeter, 70 millimeter even for a good portrait like this. You're really, you know, you're gonna sort of like distort the face less. If you see that, you know, people don't like their faces being distorted and widened out necessarily, right? And then you got short lens, but up close. Do I have a better example? No. Okay, here's an example of a specialty lens, a fisheye lens, which is like a 17 millimeter, super wide. Fisheye, you know, obviously it's in reference to the way fish eyeballs see, right? It's really wide, but you get way distorted, and it's sort of like you're in a fish bowl, right? The way it's distorting everything. You got a lot of difference between the near and far objects, right? This little bag looks really far away from this person, which in reality it probably isn't so far. This is being really exaggerated. It's really getting pulled out to the sides, right? Like skateboard photography really utilizes fisheye lenses, really makes obstacles look really big and dramatic and stuff like that. So but like you know, if you have to shoot inside of, you know, this office, or, you know, a train car or something very narrow or something like that, and you need to really shoot wide, like that's the kind of lens that you would want to use. I have only had to use it maybe once on a job, and they ended up not liking it because there's just too much distortion. Oh, there you go, the train, right? Really gives you a sense of this station. Okay, another specialty lens is a macro lens, sort of the opposite. It's really punched in. You can really sort of get details on small objects, right? So this flower, you're really starting to see even just like the water droplets and the sort of veins in the petals, because you have a macro lens. You know, depth of field also becomes greater. There's just this certain look to it, or not greater, shallower. Let's keep moving. Here's another example of a macro lens shot. Another specialty lens is a tilt shift. So you guys remember when I was talking about that plane and focus? Well, what happens if you tilt it or shift it, and now your plane of focus goes like this, right? It was like this, moving straight across, but now you've tilted it and shifted it, right? So it's a great lens for like for architecture photography. So that's what a tilt shift lens will look like for a DSLR. And it controls your perspective. Now, this is the kind of camera I use a lot of the time in my work, and you can tilt and shift the plane of focus on the back and on the front. So you really have a lot of control with this, with a large format camera, but you can see exactly what it does. Now, if you took a picture with your 35 millimeter without a tilt shift, you're gonna likely take a photo of this building like this, right? Leaning back, because To get it, you have to lean back a little bit or whatever, right? You have to tilt your camera. You're instead of moving straight across, flat across, now you're moving at an angle, right? Well, the tilt shift lens, you can correct for that because you're shooting up at this building. So now you can correct for it and take care of it that way. Now, also in Photoshop, there's tools that will let you correct for perspective in Photoshop as well, but it's always better to do it in camera, obviously, than it is to do it in Photoshop. All right, so depth of field is what we're going to talk about today. So you can see the fence image, right? You have one tiny link right here, essentially is in focus, and the rest of the fence is out of focus. Or in this bottom example, the entire fence is in focus, right? We're going to go through both of those. So wide aperture with narrow depth of, will give you narrow depth of field. So you can see see right where it says range and increased focus. This is your focus plane. And that means that from this point to this point is where that focus plane is in focus, right? So small aperture gives you a large depth of field. So that means that this point to this point is your plane of focus and all this is sharp in between. Okay, so what is that? How do you do that? So I'm not worry about that. Let me come right here. Okay, so you have your aperture size, your f-stops. F1.8 is the smaller the number. You see the opening of the lens opens up, right?
Yes.
The smaller the number, the less depth of field you get. This is let's say this is the 1.8. You're only getting this from here to here in focus. Let's say that this is f16. From here to here is in focus. Okay, same subject, same placement of the camera, same everything, but you're now in focus from here to here. Okay, and that's say f16, f11, somewhere in there. Okay.
So that has to do with like the light, correct? Amount of light is allowed in, so you're going to have a.
Yes, absolutely, that's a factor. But what would you do?
You would adjust your shutter speed.
Exactly. And what is that called?
That would be the speed.
If I change my f-stop and my shutter speed accordingly to keep the same exposure, what do we call that?
Metering.
Equivalent exposures.
Oh, okay.
Right? So as I change my aperture from 1.8 to say f22, well, I got it, 1.8 is actually not an f-stop. So let's say f2. How many f-stops is that? I don't even know. So if it's f2, then there's 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22. That's 7 stops difference. So that means I need to change my shutter speed 7 stops to accommodate that shot, which likely will mean that you have to put your camera on a tripod or something to shoot the same thing. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Also the camera subject to the distance. Don't worry about that. So we have our aperture, we have our large opening, less depth of field, shallow. You'll hear me use this word shallow. Shallow depth of field. It's smaller. It's like the woman with the leaves behind her. The shallow photograph is the one where the leaves are very blurry. Okay. Deep depth of field, smaller opening on your lens, is where the leaves are all sharp. Okay, the woman and the leaves are all sharp. So also the focal length of the lens will sort of factor into the depth of field. For your assignment, I would say try to use the same focal length per shot. Don't change your focal lengths while you're shooting. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the distance from the lens to the subject is also a determinant. Okay, so we've sort of seen this example before in the past, right? These clocks. So we have the blue clock is the sort of subject, and all the clocks are the subject in this image. A different f-stop will give us a different sort of story, different message. And the same goes here, right? So this is a 180 millimeter. So, you know, this person is soft back here. It's probably the same exposure, but then we use a shorter focal length, and now they're both sharper just by using different focal length. And then also the distance from subject to the lens will affect it. You know, this is 3 feet away and this is 10 feet away. Same lens, 3 feet away, 10 feet away. Okay, it gives you sort of a different feel and different different depth of field. Now, our assignment is about this first one. Okay, the f-stops. I just want you to understand your f-stops. Let's go. I'm gonna end it there. And let's talk about your assignment. Cool. Photo 10. Give me 1 second. All right, so for this assignment, you're gonna be shooting a still life. Does everybody understand what a still life is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. How about Tomasa? Why don't you tell me what it is?
Basically, a still life is like a prop you set up. It's like basically still, it doesn't move, and you could just like take pictures of it at different angles.
Sure. Do still lives have people in them?
No, it's some like flowers, say fruit. It could be like a cup, I guess, too. But it's mostly just like flowers and fruit.
Anybody else want to take a shot at it? Do still lives have people in it?
I've never seen one, but doesn't mean that it hasn't happened.
I bet you have. I
Yeah.
would say this about a still life. If I'm shooting a picture of a cup, like Tomasa said, and there's a hand in the photo about to pick up the cup or holding the cup, is that still a still life?
Yeah, because life is still. You've stopped everything. I think is what it's trying to say. Is nothing is moving.
I see. Even then, the moment you say that, I'm thinking back to Jeffrey's photo of that water splashing up out of the bucket or something like that. That's probably still a still life. So, you know, the point I'm making here is, you know, being sort of absolute about rules is a tough one. And I really always want to challenge you all to sort of think outside of the box a little bit, and challenge these concepts, right? Now, for your assignment, let me read it. The purpose of the assignment is for students to learn to utilize different aperture settings to create desired effect of depth of field to visually communicate your message. So your procedure, ooh, 1 second.
Is there a way you can put this up so we can read along?
Oh yeah, no, not yet, because I need to link some stuff still to it.
Okay.
But I'm just gonna read this out loud to you, and then it'll be published within the hour. But I just need to read it. I just need to add the links. All right, for this assignment, you're gonna choose an object that holds special meaning to you. An object. I wouldn't say, you know, in the past, like people have tried to use big giant objects. Try to keep it something that you can put on the tabletop. Okay. For the assignment, choose an object that holds special meaning to you. You'll photograph this object or objects and utilize depth of field to create a dynamic image. Shoot it with both shallow and deep depth of field. Use other objects to tell a story about the significant object. So consider the effects of shallow depth of field. How does it create a visual hierarchy? Are there design elements you can incorporate to make a more visually dynamic image? How does deep depth of field impact your image? How do you compose an image that makes your object the focus of your image, right? What story does it tell, and how does the depth of field affect the story? So shallow, you know, f2.8 or more, deep, f16 or less. And, you know, things to consider is the equivalent exposures. Adjusting the f-stops will dramatically affect the shutter speed, right? So slower shutter speeds require a tripod to eliminate camera shake. Those of you who don't have a tripod, you're gonna have to make one out of books or prop your phone or camera up or something, okay? You're gonna have to get creative.
Cameras can screw onto the top of a lamp. They have the same thread.
What? I'm sorry. What?
Most cameras can screw onto the top of a lamp because they have the same thread.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Little tip.
Cool. Okay. So, yeah. So in the past, you know, in the past I do this in the studio with artificial lighting, and I have people bring their stuff in. I've had people bring in a lot of toys for some reason. But I've had people bring in vinyls. I've had people bring in other cameras. I have had people bring in these little little elephant trinkets and things like that. Like these are the types of things that I'm talking about. If I were to do this, maybe I would photograph like my skateboard or something, right? Now, the point is here that you want to shoot it. You just like motion, how you display the 3 different effects in motion. I need you to shoot a minimum of 36 images, but you're going to turn in a contact sheet to me of 12 images. And on those 12 images, I need to see both shallow and deep depth of field. Does that make sense? Even if one doesn't work sort of like as far as like a cool looking image, right? If you shot it with shallow depth of field and it's just the focal plane is just too small and you're only getting a piece of the photograph in focus, I still want to see it. I just want to see that you understand the differences between the two and how to achieve that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, those of you using a phone, you're going to have to probably, I posted on under the pages some camera apps and an article that I found that will hopefully give you control over your f-stop, your aperture in your phone. Okay. So you're going to need to, if you don't already have that, then you're going to need to try to figure that out. So that's a little bit extra for you to figure out. Okay. Any other questions? Any other tips and tricks? All right. Well, I guess that's all I got for you all today. So your assignment, your motion assignment is actually due today. Mm-hmm. And we're going to critique it next week. So take the rest of this class time, go over the ones that we sort of chose together and do your manipulations, get it turned into me, get it turned into discussions page, I mean, and we'll start to go through the images first thing in class next week. Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Tomasa says stick around.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. The rest of you guys, all the papas in class, have a good week.
All right. You too.
Thank you.
Thanks,
You too.
man. Thank you. Take care. Okay, Tomasa, did you turn in your contact sheet to me?
No, I haven't done, but under the motion, it just has for like the 3 final images, so I didn't know where to turn it in.
No, turn it into the discussions page, and so we can download it.
Okay then.
Actually, though, are you on a computer?
Yes.
Do you want to just share your screen and we can look over your we can look over it that way?
Oh,
or do you want to?
Like I'm using Zoom on my phone. I thought you meant like.
So you're not on a computer. Okay. No. Okay. Well, send it, post it to the discussions page, and then we'll I'll open it up.
Okay.
And let me know when you've done it.
Okay, I've done it, Professor.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So where is your stop action?
My stop action is gonna be the let's see, on the third row, it's gonna be the first two, and on the last row, the first picture.
Okay. How is this one stop action?
Which one?
This one.
That one? Basically, I just had her posed, and she was like looking up, and she was gonna get up, and I caught her in that kind of motion of turning to get up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna say that I don't think you quite nailed the stop action, and here's why. Stop action, you know, like in a moment like this, it doesn't work. You need to stop an action, and it sort of has to be exaggerated, right? Like is she driving right here?
Yeah.
And that you're moving? Well,
Yeah.
if you stop this action, what ends up happening?
It just looks like she's sitting in a car.
It just looks like she's at a stoplight, right?
Yeah.
So stop action, the better way to do it is always like with some kind of action, right? A baseball being thrown, or she's shaking her hair and you've frozen it in place, right? So something that just really like kind of hits us over the head. That when you stop this kind of action, you just make them look like they're sitting still.
Oh, okay.
That's not really the point, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you could just shoot him sitting still. Okay. Okay. Where's your panning?
It's gonna be in the first row, the last two images, and the third row, the first image.
I would say this is not panning.
No?
No, because you didn't move your camera with the object. If it were panning, what would happen is you would move your camera with the house maybe, and you would get more stuff out of focus. What you did here is this is motion blur
Oh, okay.
because you didn't move. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So these are motion blur. I don't really see a panning here. Almost here. This is motion blur. This is motion blur. Now, I would say, you know, you don't have to, but I would definitely recommend that you go reshoot those two.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Now, having said that, this is a really beautiful image right here. This is like motion blur, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is really beautiful image. I really like this image. So if you turn this image in, I would be really happy. Okay.
Okay.
Any of these kind of images that I feel like maybe not this one so much because I can see your phone and see what's going on. It sort of has a different connotation, but this image to me feels like a still from a movie, and that's really beautiful.
Okay.
Okay. So this image or this image, I want you to turn in, but I really hope that you take the time out to reshoot the panning. Now remember panning, I got my phone, the panning, you're moving with the subject, you're moving with the subject, you're taking the photo and you keep moving. Okay. So if you're going to try it from the car, take a picture of this car as you're driving by it and just keep your camera on the car. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're going to move, click, and keep going. Okay. That's how you do panning. If you're going to do panning with other people or whatever, which I suggest always, if this, I don't know who this person is, but maybe they, I don't know, maybe you can have them drive by in the car a couple times, find a good location, drive by, and you take a photo, keep moving. Okay.
Yeah.
What else were we missing? So we got motion blur, so stop action and panning. We don't have a good stop action necessarily. So stop action, same idea, right? You need to sort of embellish some kind of action so that it's dramatized and not making a person looking like they're sitting at a stoplight, right? Okay, cool. All right. Well, good luck. And you said, and I posted a camera app that I found that I think, because you have an Android, correct?
Yeah.
So I think it will let you control your f-stops, but you said you found one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And it will let you control your f-stops.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So the next time you should be able to do it. Okay, great. I mean, all in all though, these images are really beautiful. You know, these plant images, this flower, this dark flower. I love these kinds of dark photos. Yeah, but this is such a haunting photo, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Okay, and this is not a bad portrait either. I would say it's just different than what we're looking for.
Okay.
Okay, good luck.
Okay. And if I am gonna redo them like you said, so we'll be discussing that too, like